The salty air of Cape Cod always smelled like a mixture of joy and judgment. Here at the Saltmarsh, our family's sprawling beach house, the annual reunion was in full swing. My father, Cassius, stood on the veranda, his voice a familiar boom that drowned out the sound of the ocean. He was a man made of brick and bravado, and today, his pride was aimed squarely at my older brother. He raised his glass, the crystal catching the afternoon sun. "To my son, Tiberius," he bellowed, and the whole family, aunts, uncles, cousins, cheered. Making his mark on the real world as a partner at his law firm. A real career. The praise washed over Tiberius, who stood tall and smug in his crisp linen shirt. I felt the familiar sting of being invisible, a ghost at my own family's feast. Then, my father's gaze fell on me, and his smile tightened into a smirk. The circle of family turned, their eyes following his. "And to Aurelia," he said, the words dripping with a condescending sweetness that was worse than any shout. Still clicking away on that little computer of hers. We're all so proud of her little joke of a life. The laughter that followed wasn't loud or cruel. It was worse. It was polite and pitying, the kind that says, "Bless her heart, she doesn't know any better." My sister, Livia, offered a weak, apologetic smile from across the deck. I looked at my father, the man who was supposed to be my biggest champion, reducing my entire existence to a punchline for the second time this year. In that moment, watching him, I didn't feel the urge to cry or scream. Something inside me went cold and still. A quiet, unshakable resolve settled in my bones, as solid as the granite cliffs lining the shore. The joke was over, and I was about to write the punchline. I didn't say goodbye. I slipped away from the party while my father was telling a loud story about a business deal, my absence as unnoticed as my presence had been. The laughter and clinking glasses faded behind me as I got into my car and drove away from the Saltmarsh, the familiar coastal road feeling alien and hostile. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, the injustice a bitter taste in my mouth. A few miles down the road, my phone buzzed with a call from Valeria, my co-founder, and the one person who understood my world. She didn't need to say much. She just listened as I recounted what had happened, her silence a warm blanket of validation. "Aurelia, you're building an empire while they're playing shuffleboard," she said finally, her voice firm. "Forget them." Her words were a comfort, but it was what she said next that truly caught my attention. "By the way, this is probably nothing, but I heard a rumor from my cousin who works at the bank downtown. He mentioned your father's company, Cassius Construction, was flagged for being overleveraged. He said things were looking grim." My foot eased off the gas pedal. The hurt from my father's insult was still fresh, but now it was joined by a new thought, one that was sharp and dangerous. Grim? My father projected nothing but success. He was a king in his castle, a titan of industry. Or so he wanted everyone to believe. The rumor wasn't just gossip. It felt like a clue. A key to a door I never knew existed. My anger began to shift, changing from a dull ache into a sharp, focused point. My father had made a joke of my life. I wondered what secrets were hiding behind the facade of his. When I got back to my apartment in Boston, the minimalist white walls felt like a sanctuary. Here, I wasn't a joke. I was in control. Fueled by a cold fury, I did what I do best. I dug for data. My company specialized in AI that could analyze complex patterns, and I turned that power toward Cassius Construction. I spent the night pulling public records, credit reports, and financial statements. It didn't take long to find the truth. Valeria's rumor was an understatement. My father wasn't just struggling, he was drowning. His company was suffocating under a mountain of debt. I found multiple liens filed against his commercial properties, a clear sign that he was failing to pay his contractors. He had leveraged everything to maintain the illusion of success, the illusion that allowed him to stand on that veranda and mock my life's work. The final blow came in the early hours of the morning, my eyes burning from staring at the screen. I found a discreet, private real estate listing. There were no pictures of the front of the house, only the ocean view from the back deck, but I knew it instantly. It was the Saltmarsh. He was trying to sell our family's history, the repository of every childhood memory, to save his failing business. He was selling it in secret because his pride was more important than his family. He hadn't told anyone. Not my mother before she passed, and not his children now. He was a king abandoning a sinking castle, and he was doing it with a smile on his face. The hurt I felt was now mixed with a chilling clarity. He hadn't just insulted me, he had betrayed all of us. The next morning, the sun streamed into my office, but I felt a cold sense of purpose. I called my lawyer, Silas, a man whose discretion was as sharp as his legal mind. We met in his downtown office, the city humming below us.
I didn't waste time with small talk.
"I need you to create a shell corporation for me, Silas," I said, my voice steady. "And I need it done today." He raised an eyebrow but didn't question my urgency. He knew me well enough to understand that when I made a decision, it was backed by data and determination. "What's the name?" he asked, already typing on his computer. "Veritas Holdings," I replied. "Truth Holdings." It felt fitting. By noon, the corporation was legally formed, with no public record linking it to my name. My next instruction was simple and direct. Through Veritas, I wanted to submit an offer for the beach house at the Saltmarsh. All cash, 10% above asking price. Silas's fingers paused over his keyboard. "An aggressive offer," he noted. "Is there something I should know?" "Only that the seller is highly motivated and his pride won't let him negotiate," I said. "And I want this to be the only viable offer on his desk." He nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face as he began to understand the game. A few hours later, he called back. "You were right," he said. "There was only one other offer, a lowball bid from a development firm looking to flip the property. Your father's agent said he was getting desperate. Our offer has been sent. Now we wait." But I knew we wouldn't be waiting long. I knew my father. His pride would never let him accept a lowball offer, but his desperation would force him to take the first great one that came along, no questions asked. A week felt like a lifetime. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped into my throat. I threw myself into my work, closing a major deal with a museum in Florence to restore a dozen Renaissance masterpieces digitally. The irony was thick. While I was preserving history for the world, I was secretly buying back my own. Finally, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Silas's name flashed on my screen. "Congratulations, Ms. Aurelia," he said, his voice smooth and professional. Chief Cassius accepted the offer without hesitation. "The title is being transferred as we speak. The Saltmarsh is yours." I leaned back in my chair, the city of Boston sprawling out behind my office window. A strange calm washed over me. It wasn't triumph, not yet. It was the quiet satisfaction of a complex problem solved. The joke of a life my father mocked had just saved our family's most precious asset from his own poor decisions. A moment later, my phone pinged with a notification from the family group chat. It was a message from my sister, Livia, accompanied by a sunny, oblivious emoji. "Reunion next year is set for the first weekend in August. Can't wait to see everyone back at the Saltmarsh." A flurry of happy responses followed from my aunts and cousins. No one knew the ground had shifted beneath their feet. No one knew the queen of the castle had been deposed. I looked at the heavy, old-fashioned brass keys that had arrived by courier from Silas's office, sitting on my desk next to my sleek, modern laptop. They looked like they belonged to two different worlds. My two worlds. And they were about to collide. The next 11 months were a blur of code, contracts, and construction. While my public life involved scaling my company, my private life was dedicated to the Saltmarsh. The first thing I did was hire the best contractors on the Cape to address the years of neglect my father had ignored. They fixed the leaking roof that had stained the ceiling in my old bedroom. They reinforced the foundation that was being slowly eroded by the sea. They installed a state-of-the-art security system, one that I could control from my phone in Boston. But this wasn't just about repairs. It was about restoration. I flew in an art historian from New York to carefully preserve my late mother's beautiful seascape paintings, which had been gathering dust and mold in the humid air. Her art was the soul of the house, and I was determined to bring it back to life. I hired a local craftsman to refinish the original hardwood floors, stripping away decades of scratches and scuffs until the wood gleamed with the warmth I remembered from my childhood. I wasn't erasing the past. I was honoring the best parts of it. Every decision was mine. Every invoice was paid from the accounts of my joke of a company. With each restored painting and polished floorboard, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. My father had let the soul of the house decay, just as he had let our relationship decay. I was rebuilding both, one careful step at a time, making it stronger than it had ever been before. By the time July rolled around, the Saltmarsh was no longer just a house. It was a fortress.
It was a sanctuary.
It was mine. The first Friday of August arrived, crisp and clear. I drove down to the Cape early, the familiar turns of the coastal road feeling different. This time, I wasn't a visitor. I was the host. I spent the afternoon on the restored veranda, an espresso at my side, the sea breeze cool against my skin. I waited. Right on schedule, my father's gleaming black BMW crunched up the gravel driveway. He got out, stretching like a king returning to his domain. He strode confidently to the front door, pulling the old brass key from his pocket. I didn't move. I just watched. I watched him insert the key into the brand-new, high-security lock. I watched him try to turn it. I watched the confident set of his shoulders slump in confusion as the lock refused to budge. "What is this nonsense?" he muttered, loud enough for me to hear. He jiggled the handle aggressively, as if trying to intimidate the door into opening. Just then, Tiberius's sleek SUV and Livia's white Range Rover pulled in behind him. The family began to emerge, laughing and unloading coolers and suitcases, their happy chatter filling the air. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Livia asked, balancing her young daughter, Camilla, on her hip. "The key isn't working," he grumbled, his face starting to turn a blotchy red with frustration. "This is ridiculous. Femi, try yours." Tiberius, ever the golden child, swaggered to the door with an air of superiority, as if his key possessed some special magic. He inserted it. Nothing. The rest of the family, aunts, uncles, cousins, all fumbled for their own keys, their festive mood rapidly dissolving into a cloud of bewildered anger. The king was locked out of his castle, and his entire court was watching. I let the scene play out for a full 5 minutes. The symphony of their frustration was music to my ears. Finally, when my father started to consider kicking the door down, I decided it was time. I stood up, my heels making a soft, deliberate clicking sound on the deck boards. I walked to the heavy front door and, from the inside, turned the deadbolt. The thump of the lock disengaging was loud in the sudden silence. I pulled the door open, my shadow falling over my stunned family. I leaned against the doorframe, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my espresso. "Looking for something?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm and even. 8 pairs of eyes stared at me as if I were an apparition.
8 jaws went slack.
My father was the first to find his voice, and it was laced with fury. "Aurelia," he sputtered, his confusion morphing into rage. "What is the meaning of this? How did you get in here?" I allowed myself a small smile. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times, and it was even more satisfying than I had imagined. "I live here," I said simply. The 3 words dropped into the heavy silence, each one landing with the weight of a stone. I watched their faces, a gallery of shock and disbelief. My father, speechless. Tiberius, looking from me to his father as if his world had just tilted on its axis. Livia, her hand flying to her mouth. They had come here expecting to walk back into their world, the world where I was the joke and they were the audience. But I had changed the locks. I had rewritten the script, and the show was just getting started. "That's impossible," Tiberius finally managed to say. He stepped forward, instinctively falling into his role as a lawyer, ready to cross-examine a hostile witness. "This is Dad's house. We grew up here." His voice was filled with an indignant certainty that, just a year ago, would have made me shrink. "Not anymore, is it?" I asked, raising a single eyebrow. I held up my tablet, the screen glowing in the late afternoon light. With a flick of my thumb, I brought up a file. Your legal expertise might be a little rusty, brother. I turned the screen so they could all see. There it was, in crisp, clear PDF form, the ironclad deed of assignment, the official state title, and the transfer of ownership to Veritas Holdings. My finger pointed to the final line, where the sole director of the corporation was listed. Veritas Holdings, of which I am the sole director, purchased this property 11 months ago, I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. It's my house. Bought and paid for. I saw Tiberius's eyes scan the legal jargon, the lawyer in him recognizing the unassailable truth. He took a half-step back, his confidence evaporating like sea spray in the wind. My father stared at the screen, his face a mask of disbelief. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No, the agent said it was a holding company, an investment firm from Boston. It is, I said coolly. My investment firm. Built by my joke of a life. The words hung in the air, a perfect echo of his insult from a year ago. I watched the understanding dawn on their faces, the slow, dawning horror as they realized the full scope of what had happened. The outcast had not just returned, she had bought the kingdom. My father, his face pale and his bravado shattered, finally snapped. I don't know what kind of sick game you're playing, Aurelia, but this reunion is over, he declared, his voice trembling with rage. Everyone, we're leaving. We won't stay under the roof of someone who would betray her own family. He turned on his heel, fully expecting his loyal subjects to follow him in a grand exodus. He marched toward his car, a king in self-imposed exile. But no one moved. His command, once law in our family, now just hung in the tense, silent air. Tiberius was still staring at the tablet in my hand, processing the financial betrayal. Livia was looking at her children, who were starting to get fussy. Finally, it was Livia's husband, Marcus, a quiet man I barely knew, who broke the spell. And go where, Cassius? He asked, his voice reasonable but firm. I just checked my phone. There isn't a single hotel room available for 100 miles. Everything is booked solid for the end of summer weekend. My father stopped dead in his tracks. He turned slowly, the reality of the situation dawning on him. He had no power here. He had no kingdom to retreat to. They were stranded. I had not only bought the house, I had, through careful planning, ensured there was no other option for them. They were trapped in my gilded cage, forced to play by my rules. I held the door open wider. Please come in, I said, my voice dangerously sweet. The guest rooms are all ready. I wouldn't want my family to be without a place to stay. The invitation was a command, and they all knew it. Defeated, they began to pick up their coolers and suitcases, filing past me into the house that was once theirs, now mine. The first evening at the Saltmarsh was thick with a tension you could cut with a knife. My family moved through the house like ghosts, their usual loud, boisterous energy replaced by sullen silence. They grudgingly brought their belongings inside, their movements stiff and awkward. But they couldn't ignore the changes. I watched my sister Livia run her hand over the newly refinished kitchen countertops, her eyes widening at the gleaming, top-of-the-line Sub-Zero refrigerator. Tiberius, a self-proclaimed coffee snob, stared in disbelief at the custom Italian espresso machine I had installed. My father said nothing, but I saw him staring at one of our mother's restored paintings, the vibrant colors now shining as they had when she first painted it. He looked haunted. The only person who seemed happy was my 7-year-old niece, Camilla. Unburdened by the adult drama, she explored the house with wide-eyed wonder. She eventually found me in my new office, a sun-filled room overlooking the ocean that used to be a storage closet. She crept in quietly, her eyes fixed on the large monitor on my desk. On the screen, my AI software was meticulously restoring a faded Renaissance painting, filling in cracks and reviving colors pixel by pixel. Wow, she whispered, her little face illuminated by the glow of the screen. What are you doing? I'm helping this old painting feel beautiful again, I explained softly. She watched, mesmerized, as a patch of dull brown transformed into a vibrant, shimmering gold. You're like a magic doctor for pictures, she said, her voice filled with awe. In that moment, surrounded by the silent hostility of the rest of my family, this little girl's innocent admiration felt like the first ray of sunshine after a long storm. She saw magic in my work. It was a start. Later that night, Tiberius found me on the veranda. The party lights my father usually strung up were gone, leaving the deck in a quiet, contemplative darkness. "I can't believe you did this," he began, his voice low and accusatory. "To stoop so low, to take advantage of Dad when he was clearly struggling. It's dishonorable." I turned from the ocean to face him, my expression unreadable. Dishonorable. I repeated the word, letting it hang in the salty air. Is it more dishonorable than a father mocking his own daughter's life's work? Or is it more dishonorable than a man gambling away his family's future? Tiberius scoffed. He made some bad business decisions. It happens. He didn't gamble away our future. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply unlocked my tablet and pulled up a different set of files, the ones I had hoped I wouldn't have to use. I handed it to him. "Read the fine print, counselor," I said quietly. On the screen were the legal documents for the trust fund our grandfather had established for Livia and him. And pinned to those documents were bank records showing that Cassius, in his desperation to secure a loan to save his failing company, had illegally leveraged their trust funds as collateral. He had risked their inheritance without their knowledge or consent. I watched my brother's face as he scrolled through the documents. The anger directed at me slowly dissolved, replaced by a sick, pale shock. His legal mind instantly grasped the gravity of the betrayal. The numbers were undeniable. The signatures were my father's. Our father hadn't just made a few bad business decisions. He had committed fraud against his own children. He told me, Tiberius whispered, his voice cracking. He told me everything was fine. The confrontation I expected happened sooner than I thought. Tiberius, armed with the undeniable proof of our father's betrayal, didn't wait. He found Cassius in the living room, staring blankly at one of our mother's restored paintings. "You used our trust funds," Tiberius said, his voice dangerously quiet. It wasn't a question. Cassius flinched, as if struck. "I was going to pay it back," he stammered, his usual bluster gone, replaced by the pathetic whining of a cornered man. "It was just a temporary measure. The deal was going to come through." "What deal?" Tiberius shot back, his voice rising. "Another one of your fantasies? You lied to us. You gambled with our money, with Grandpa's legacy." From the hallway, Livia, drawn by the raised voices, appeared. She stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth as she listened to Tiberius lay out the details of our father's deception. I saw the perfect, carefully constructed image of her world shatter in her eyes. All her life, she had believed in the myth of Cassius the Invincible, the strong patriarch who provided and protected. The stability she had taken for granted, the foundation upon which she had built her own family, was nothing more than an illusion built on a bedrock of lies. The argument grew louder, more heated. The raw wounds of betrayal ripped open for all to see. For the first time in his life, Tiberius was not defending our father, he was prosecuting him. The golden child's blind loyalty had been shattered, and the perfect facade of the happy, successful family I had always envied from the outside was cracking apart, right in front of my eyes. The sound of their shouting echoed through the house, a painful, ugly, but necessary storm. Later that night, long after the shouting had died down and an uneasy silence had settled over the house, I found Livia sitting alone on the dark deck, hugging her knees to her chest. The ocean was calm, a stark contrast to the storm that had just ripped through our family. She looked up as I approached, her eyes red from crying. I sat down in the chair next to her, leaving a space between us. For a long time we just sat in silence listening to the waves. "I always envied you," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. I was so surprised I couldn't speak. "Livia, the popular, beautiful sister who had everything envied me? You did. You got away," she continued, her gaze fixed on the dark horizon. "You built your own life, on your own terms. I did what was expected. I married the right man, had the perfect children, hosted the perfect parties. I played my part, and none of it was real. She took a shaky breath, then revealed a secret that changed everything I thought I knew about our family. Mom wanted to be an architect, Livia said softly. She was brilliant. She had a scholarship to one of the best schools in the country. But Dad pressured her to turn it down. He told her a woman's place was at home, raising a family, not on a construction site competing with men. The confession landed with the force of a physical blow. He told her that her dreams were a silly distraction, Livia said, tears welling up in her eyes again. He wanted a wife who supported his ambitions, not one who had her own. Suddenly, my father's decades of dismissal, his constant mockery of my career, all of it clicked into place.
It wasn't just about me. It was a pattern.
He hadn't just tried to crush my ambition. He had succeeded in crushing our mothers first. Livia's confession lit a fire in me. It was no longer just about my own hurt. It was about my mother's stolen dreams. The next morning, while the rest of the family tiptoed around each other in a fog of resentment, I went to the attic. It was musty and filled with forgotten things. Old furniture, holiday decorations, boxes of my childhood toys. I was looking for something specific. I remembered my mother spending hours up here, sketching in a large portfolio, telling me they were just doodles. My father had called them her little hobby. In the farthest, darkest corner, tucked away behind a stack of old suitcases, I found it. A large, leather-bound portfolio, cracked and faded with age. My heart hammered against my ribs as I untied the ribbon and opened it. It wasn't just doodles. It was a collection of breathtaking architectural drawings. Page after page of innovative, beautiful designs for sustainable coastal homes. They were brilliant, filled with light and air, designed to work in harmony with the ocean, not just exist beside it. She had designed passive solar heating systems and rainwater collection roofs long before they were fashionable. The plans were decades ahead of their time. I sank to the floor, the dusty attic air thick with the weight of this discovery. My mother hadn't just been a hobbyist, she had been a visionary. I traced the lines of her elegant handwriting, the detailed notes in the margins. It was all there, her passion, her intelligence, her talent. I realized with a startling clarity that I hadn't just inherited her artistic eye, I had inherited the ambition that Cassius had tried so hard to extinguish. He had buried her legacy in this attic, but I had just unearthed it, and I would not let it be forgotten again. As I came down from the attic, my mother's portfolio clutched in my hands, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. A sleek, black Tesla, a car that screamed new money and ruthless efficiency, had just pulled up. A man in a sharp, tailored suit stepped out. I recognized him instantly from the covers of Boston business journals. Marcus Vedius, a ruthless real estate developer known for buying up coastal properties and turning them into generic, high-priced resorts. He was also my father's biggest and most bitter rival. He strolled onto the veranda as if he owned it, his eyes taking in the tense family scene with an amused smirk. "Cassius," he called out, his voice smooth and predatory. "I'm surprised to see you here. I heard the bank was foreclosing on this whole stretch of coast. I guess the rumors of your financial troubles were true after all." My father, already humbled, seemed to shrink even further under his rival's mocking gaze. Marcus then turned his attention to me, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He had clearly done his research on Veritas Holdings and knew who was really in charge. "You must be the new owner," he said, extending a hand that I did not take. "I was the other bidder for this place, you know. My offer was a bit lower." He let out a low chuckle. "My plan is to tear down this old house and the 5 empty lots next to it. I'm going to build a luxury hotel and spa, the crown jewel of the Cape." The casual way he spoke about destroying my home, my mother's home, sent a chill down my spine. The stakes of this weekend had just escalated dramatically. This was no longer just about my family's drama. It was about saving my mother's legacy from being bulldozed into oblivion by this shark in a suit. Marcus Vedius ignored the shocked expressions on my family's faces and focused solely on me. He saw me not as Cassius's daughter, but as a business entity, an obstacle to be removed. "Look," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone, "I know what you paid for this place. I'll give you double."
Right now.
All cash. He pulled a checkbook from his jacket pocket as if to prove his point. "You're a tech person, right? You're not in the real estate game. This is a quick, clean, and very profitable exit for you. You can take the money and go back to your computers." The offer hung in the air, a staggering sum of money that would have been tempting to anyone else. I saw my father's eyes widen. For a moment, I think he hoped I would take it, that I would solve all his problems with one simple transaction. Tiberius and Livia just stared, caught in the crossfire of a battle they didn't understand. But Marcus had made a critical miscalculation. He thought this was about money. He couldn't possibly know that he was threatening to destroy the very thing I had just rediscovered, my mother's soul, captured on paper in a dusty attic. I clutched the portfolio tighter. "The house is not for sale," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the granite seawall. Marcus's smile faltered for a second. He wasn't used to being told no. "Don't be sentimental," he scoffed. "It's a decaying old house on a valuable piece of land. I'm offering you a fortune." "Some things," I replied, looking him directly in the eye, "are more important than a fortune." I had bought the house to reclaim my past. Now I realized I had to fight to protect its future. The arrival of Marcus Vettius and his bulldozer-sized ego had a strange and immediate effect on my family. Faced with a common enemy, a man who threatened to physically erase their history, their own internal conflicts suddenly seemed petty and insignificant. The Cold War between Cassius and Tiberius thawed into a tense, unspoken truce. When Marcus had made his offer, I saw my brother and sister look at me, and for the first time all weekend, their expressions were not filled with resentment or confusion. They were filled with desperation. They looked at me not as their outcast younger sister, but as the only one in the room with the power to stop the shark at the door. "He can't do that, can he?" Livia whispered after Marcus had retreated to his car to take a call, his presence still lingering on the veranda like a bad smell. "Just tear it all down?" "Legally, if he owns the property, he can," Tiberius answered, his lawyer brain automatically kicking in. "But he doesn't own it," he added, looking at me. "You do." My father, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Vettius has been trying to buy up this coastline for years. He's ruthless. If he wants this land, he won't give up easily." For the first time, we weren't a fractured group of individuals nursing our own grievances. We were a family, united by a shared threat. They had spent years looking down on me, on my quiet, digital world. But now, they were all looking to me for a solution. They had no idea that the answer wasn't on my computer. It was in the leather-bound portfolio I held in my hands. Later that afternoon, after Marcus had finally left with a parting threat to make me a better offer soon, my father found me by the seawall. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, the bluster and bravado completely stripped away, leaving only a tired, defeated old man. The setting sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and for a long time, he just stood beside me, staring at the waves. "He's going to destroy it all, isn't he?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The house your mother loved." I didn't answer. I just let him talk. And for the first time in my life, he did. He confessed everything. He spoke of the shame of his failing business, the sleepless nights spent worrying about payroll, the terror of losing the high status he had worked his entire life to build. He admitted he had been too proud to ask for help, too proud to admit he had failed. "I called your life a joke," he said, his voice cracking. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "The truth is, I didn't understand it. Your world of code and algorithms, it's not a world I know. It's not concrete and steel. And it scared me. It scared me that you were building something so successful that I couldn't see or touch it. It made me feel irrelevant." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was the truth. It was the confession of a proud man humbled by his own failures and by the success of the daughter he had never valued. It didn't erase the years of hurt, but it was a start. It was a foundation, cracked and broken, but one that could possibly be repaired. My father's confession changed my motivation. It was no longer about revenge. It was about building something better. That night, I didn't sleep. I went back to my office, the room that had become the command center for this entire operation, and I launched a different kind of offensive. I wasn't just defending my property anymore. I was attacking my enemy's plan. I dove into the digital archives of the Cape Cod municipal government. I cross-referenced zoning ordinances, environmental protection statutes, and coastal building regulations. My AI software, which I had designed to find hidden patterns in Renaissance art, was just as effective at finding hidden loopholes and violations in legal documents. I worked through the night, fueled by coffee and a fierce determination. By dawn, as the first light of the sun began to paint the ocean gray, I found it. A series of critical violations in Marcus Vedius's proposed hotel development plan. His project, as it was designed, violated 3 key coastal preservation laws intended to protect the fragile dune ecosystem. One of the violations concerned a protected species of shorebird whose nesting grounds were located on one of the adjacent lots he planned to excavate. His ambitious, glass and steel monstrosity wasn't just a threat to my home. It was illegal. I downloaded the statutes, the environmental impact reports, and the relevant legal precedents. I had him. He thought he could bully his way through this with money and power. But he had underestimated me. He was playing a game of real-world chess, but I was playing a game of digital warfare. And I had just found his checkmate. I had the leverage I needed to not just stop him, but to control the outcome. As I prepared my strategy to confront Marcus, my eyes fell on the leather portfolio sitting on my desk. I opened it again, my mother's elegant designs spreading out in the morning light. I wasn't just looking at drawings anymore. I was looking at a solution. An idea struck me with the force and clarity of a lightning bolt. Her plans weren't just for a single house. They were a blueprint for a community. The way she had designed the homes to work with the landscape, the notes she had made about using sustainable materials and preserving the natural dunes, it was a complete vision. She hadn't just designed a house. She had designed a future for this coastline. This was it. This was the secret weapon. Confronting Marcus with his legal violations was a shield. It would stop his attack. But my mother's designs were a sword. They were a proactive, brilliant counterproposal. I wasn't just going to tell him what he couldn't build. I was going to show him what he should build instead. My mind raced, connecting the dots. I could use my company's resources to create a stunning 3D visualization of my mother's vision. I could run financial models projecting the long-term profitability of small-scale, eco-friendly luxury properties, which were becoming increasingly popular with wealthy, environmentally conscious buyers. I wasn't just going to save my house. I was going to bring my mother's legacy to life. I was going to build something beautiful and lasting in the very place my father's ambition had failed, and my rival's greed threatened to destroy everything. The fight for the Saltmarsh was over. The fight for my mother's vision was just beginning. I didn't waste any time. I gathered my family in the living room, my father, Tiberius, and Livia. They looked tired and uncertain, like survivors of a shipwreck waiting to see if they would be rescued. I laid my mother's portfolio on the large coffee table, the elegant drawings looking like ancient maps to a lost treasure. "This is our way forward," I said, my voice filled with a new energy. I explained my discovery in the attic, showing them the brilliance of our mother's vision. Then I laid out my plan. "We don't just block Marcus," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "We build something better. We build this." I showed them the legal violations I had found, explaining how we could stop Marcus's project cold. But then I pivoted. We're not going to be defined by fighting against him. We're going to be defined by what we create. I proposed that we form a new company, a true family business. We would combine all of our strengths, my tech and capital to create the models and secure the financing, Tiberius's legal skills to navigate the permits and contracts, Livia's incredible eye for design and aesthetics to bring my mother's vision to life with modern touches, and Cassius, I turned to my father, and your construction experience to manage the builds. To do it right this time. To build a legacy, not just an empire. A new light sparked in my father's eyes, a flicker of the man he used to be, but tempered with newfound humility. Tiberius and Livia looked at each other, a silent agreement passing between them. In that moment, we were not a broken family. We were a team. "What do we call this new company?" Livia asked softly. I smiled.
"Saltmarsh Development," I said.
"It starts here." Our meeting with Marcus Vettius took place on what was now my territory, the veranda of the Saltmarsh. He arrived with his usual arrogance, expecting me to have reconsidered his offer of a buyout. My father, brother, and sister stood with me, a united front. He smirked when he saw them. "Brought your family for moral support?" he sneered. "No," I said calmly. "I brought my business partners." Before he could respond, I began. I laid out, with cold, hard precision, the evidence of his zoning violations. I presented the environmental impact reports and the legal precedents, showing him exactly how I could tie up his hotel project in court for years, costing him millions in legal fees and lost opportunities. His smirk vanished, replaced by a tight, angry line. He knew I had him cornered. "What do you want?" he finally gritted out. "To buy me off?" That's when I made my move. "I don't want your money," I said, sliding my tablet across the table. On the screen was a stunning, photorealistic 3D rendering of my mother's vision, a small, exclusive community of beautiful, eco-friendly homes nestled seamlessly into the coastal landscape. "This is what is going to be built here," I stated. "A project that respects the land and the law."
He scoffed.
"A fantasy. A very profitable fantasy," I countered, swiping to a detailed financial projection. "The market for sustainable luxury is booming. This is a smarter, safer investment than your concrete behemoth." I leaned forward, delivering the final, unexpected blow. "I'm not asking you to back down, Marcus. I'm offering you a way to invest as a silent, minority partner. You can either fight me in court and lose everything, or you can join us and make a smaller, but guaranteed, profit." Checkmate. Marcus Vettius, the shark, was trapped. He stared at the screen, then at the united faces of my family. He saw the legal nightmare I had prepared for him on one side, and on the other, a meticulously planned, data-backed business proposal. His predatory instincts warred with his business sense. He could try to fight, to bully his way through the courts, but he was a developer, not a litigator. A long, drawn-out legal battle would bleed him dry and tarnish his reputation. My offer, on the other hand, was an elegant solution to his problem. It allowed him to save face and still turn a profit, even if it meant swallowing his pride and partnering with the family of his old rival. His jaw tightened. I could see the calculations running behind his eyes. Finally, with a sigh of frustrated defeat, he nodded. "Send your lawyer the paperwork," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He stood up, gave my father one last withering look, and left without another word. The moment his Tesla disappeared down the driveway, a collective breath was released. Livia let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Tiberius actually smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of awe and gratitude. The Saltmarsh was safe. More than safe. It was now the heart of our new family enterprise, a future built on my terms, fueled by my success, and guided by my mother's long-forgotten vision. We hadn't just won a battle. We had changed the course of our family's history. The past had been reclaimed, and the future was ours to build. 1 year later, the first weekend of August arrived again. The family was gathered at the Saltmarsh for the annual reunion, but everything was different. The air wasn't thick with tension. It was buzzing with a new, collaborative energy. Next door, on the first of the 5 lots, the wooden frame of the first eco-friendly coastal home was rising against the blue sky, a testament to our new beginning. My father, now a consultant for Saltmarsh Development, was excitedly explaining the sustainable building materials to my uncles. Tiberius and Livia were poring over interior design swatches with Camilla, who had appointed herself the chief color officer. At sunset, we all gathered on the veranda. Cassius stood up, holding his glass. He didn't boom this time. His voice was quieter, steadier, as he turned to me. He looked at me with a pride I had spent my whole life craving, a pride that was finally, truly mine. To my daughter, Aurelia, he said, his voice clear and strong, carrying over the gentle sound of the waves. She showed us that the strongest foundations aren't built of concrete, but of courage. She reminded us what our family is worth and gave us a future we never could have built on our own. The whole family raised their glasses, their faces open and smiling. As the glasses clinked, a sound of genuine celebration, I looked out at the ocean. The revenge I had sought a year ago felt like a distant memory. It had been sweet, yes, but what had grown from its ashes was infinitely better. It was a family rebuilt. It was a mother's legacy, honored. It was a future, full of purpose. The joke of a life had become a legacy. And it was everything